I firmly believe that sexual and gender based violence is not a women's issue at all. It's a societal issue. It's the socio cultural context in which we live in that promotes this violence, that perpetuates this violence. And men are also victims of that.
Hello and welcome to Anahita Speaker Series presented by Carnegie India. The Anahita Speaker Series celebrates stirring stories of empowerment, struggle, and success from women professionals in different fields across the globe. Stories we hope are bound to inspire young professionals. I am Adyasha Ananya Das, Young Ambassador for the Security Studies Program at Carnegie India. Today we have with us ElsaMarie D'Silva. Elsa is the founder of Red Dot Foundation India and president of Red Dot Foundation Global US. Its platform SafeCity crowdsources personal experiences of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces. Since SafeCity's inception in 2012, it has become the largest crowdsourcing map on the issue in India and abroad. A renowned social entrepreneur, Elsa has won many awards. She was named one of the BBC's 100 Women in 2018. She has won the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award, Female Entrepreneur of the Year Award, among many others. Elsa, we are really pleased to have you here with us today, and thank you so much for making time for this.
Thank you for having me, Adyasha, and I'm really glad to be speaking with you and your audience.
Yeah. So I will just start off. So I was going through the Safe City website, and it struck me how simple the idea is. The platform uses technology to address a very common issue that women face in public spaces. But having said that, I also realize that sometimes the simple ideas can be the hardest to execute. So I wanted to ask you how you cracked this idea. How did you know what form Safe City was going to take? And if you could just give a glimpse to our audience about how the journey panned out.
Thank you. It's a really great question. I didn't realize till you actually put it down on paper that the simplest things are the hardest to crack. And so also it is with SafeCity. So the journey with SafeCity actually began in December 2012, when you would have recalled that we had this horrific incident with Jyoti Singh on a bus in Delhi, where she was gang raped multiple times and then left to die on the streets. So at that time, I was in the aviation sector. I was vice president network planning for Kingfisher Airlines. And I was looking for my purpose, during that time. So all of 2012, I was looking for my purpose whilst my airline was also going through a downturn. And, I knew that at some point I wanted to work on women's rights, children's rights, but I didn't know how to do it, how to go about it, which aspect to really focus on till this particular incident with Jyoti Singh, which was a catalyst. So, if you recall, during that time, we were all talking about this horrific incident. If we put on the TV, it was on the news everywhere. You went to any public gathering or private gathering, people were talking about it because we were all shocked and horrified. And it also emotionally triggered a lot of memories that we had suppressed, especially, myself. I remembered being groped on a train as a 13-year-old, being sexually harassed at the workplace, and many other incidents. But also, I remember that I'd never really spoken about it to anyone. I suddenly realized that my girlfriends were experiencing something similar where they started opening up and sharing. And it was the first time that most of us were talking about it. And this led me to believe that there was a data gap that exists because we experience this kind of violence pretty much on a daily basis, but we often keep quiet because of the shame and taboo around it. And therefore, SafeCity was born to bridge that data gap. And you would think that it's so simple, right? Like I was so naive to believe that this was it, launch a platform, put it out there, get everyone to share their stories, which immediately after the gang rape, that's what happened. There was a slew of stories that poured in from all parts of the country. Some even came from abroad. But then, what next? What happens after that? How do you keep up the momentum? How do you get more people to share their stories? And that really is the hardest part of the job because, you're sharing something that is extremely personal to you, something that has been extremely traumatic. And yet you're gathering up the courage to put it out in the public domain, even if it's anonymous. And what then? What happens next, to the survivor or to the issue? And for me, the challenge was to make it a value add and a win win for everyone. So that's how we started with our on ground programs, where we started encouraging people to look at the data at a hyper local level. That means all these individual stories get collated on a map and visualized as hotspots so that you can see the scope of the problem, you can visualize it, and also make it relevant to where you're living, whether it's your neighborhood or if it's similar to an experience that you had, so that you don't feel alone. But it also is a starting point for dialogue and trust building in a community, because you can take that data set to your community and say, look at it. Look at what's happening to the women here or to the people here, or look at what's happening in this space. And why is it happening? What can we do to prevent it? And that really is the starting point for all the work that we subsequently have done.
Yeah, like you mentioned, people generally are very reluctant to share stories because they're not pleasant to hear. But SafeCity is a very convenient platform, and people feel safe about sharing their stories, and that's really incredible. So that brings me to my next question. What are the challenges you faced while building SafeCity in terms of funding or in terms of just building it from the scratch? So,
I think the
professionally and
biggest
personally.
I think the biggest challenge was myself. I came from aviation, which is a very niche industry. I didn't have any background in gender studies, never participated in the women's movement, and all I had was my own experiences, right? Um, so I had a lot of learning, unlearning, and relearning to do. It was a very steep learning curve for me, but I did that, with all humility, accepting that I didn't know anything, and tried to speak with as many people as possible, researched a lot, enrolled in many courses as well, did a lot of fellowships, and created my network. So within a short period of time, I think we've built that credibility, because we have been part of many, many different programs. The second is that when I started, people had not heard of crowdsourced data. So they didn't understand the value of it. They didn't understand what it was, how can it be useful, how can we be looking at an entire data set and not one woman's story. And, I often get asked the question, but what happens to that individual survivor? And I'm like, the people who report are reporting anonymously. That is the value add for them, because they know that they don't have to reveal their names before they give their story. And the benefit is in the collective. So we are showcasing the data as a collective whole and then inviting people to take action, right? So the way we work with individual survivors through the tech platform is to push information on helplines, the Indian Penal Code or any other legislation based on that location, or any other help, like nudging them to go to the police station, nudging them to go to a hospital based on the category that they picked and the place where they are, right? So that's how we work with individual survivors. We also have individual survivors writing directly to us, but then that's a different ball game because they have, revealed their name and who they are, and they are seeking for specific help. And we have partner organizations for that. The third challenge was really getting other nonprofits to collaborate with us, because there was this suspicion, like, how is this data really going to make a difference? But in reality, everybody is working on individual cases, and it is hard to see patterns and trends if you're not collating the data as a collective. So that was another new learning for a lot of people, that you can make a case and you would get buy-in from institutional service providers like the police, civic authorities, transport officials, because there's no naming, shaming, or blaming. You're just giving them a data set, information that they can work with. And of course, driven by community, all our work is very participatory and involves community. So I would say just the concept was a very new concept. In fact, I got a lot of support from the West, outside of the country, because they understood what I was trying to do. But in India, we were still focused on the individual survivor and less on the data. And today, the data set is much valued, much sought after. We have a lot of people, including researchers, reaching out because this is a unique data set that doesn't exist anywhere. More than 95% of our survivors say they have not gone to the police with this information, nor want to go. So it's a very important data set. And the last one is tech itself. We started with the Ushahidi platform, which had its use in the beginning, but was very limited. And then we built our own mobile app from scratch, but then the two platforms, the Ushahidi and the mobile apps, weren't talking to each other. And in the meantime, we had GDPR, which is the global data protection law in Europe, that came out, which affected our app on several platforms. So we had to redo the entire platform. And today our platform is completely in line with GDPR, that protects the anonymity of the users. So I would say the tech journey was one, the social journey and the learning journey was another.
Thank you, Elsa, for that answer. It comprehensively kind of gave me a sense of what it requires to build a system from scratch, and especially in the social sector. So, I want to pick up on your experience in the aviation sector. So, what do you think your experience, your 2 decades of experience in the aviation sector, has influenced what you're doing in the social sector?
Yes, I spent about 2 decades between two of India's largest airlines, Jet Airways and then Kingfisher Airlines. I started off as a flight attendant. Then I was a safety instructor teaching pilots and cabin crew safety and emergency procedures. I was then identified for a fast track, which led me into strategy, revenue management. And then I was headhunted for a startup airline, Kingfisher, where I did many different things and ended up as vice president network planning. And to your first question, I think that what I do today is harder than what I did where I was responsible for 500 daily flights. So um, I think there's lots to learn from aviation. First of all, aviation, there's a great emphasis on safety. And I draw a lot on, building your situational awareness. So air travel is one of the safest forms of travel. There are fewer deaths than any other transport industry. And that's because of the regulations, the training, the situational awareness. Everyone is really focused on safety. If you remember, before every departure, you do a safety demonstration. That is to increase the situational awareness of the people so that in case of an accident, you can evacuate the plane in 90 seconds or less, no matter how big the plane is. Now, do we have that same consciousness when we step out of our homes or when we are in a particular situation? Very rarely do we think of our safety, right? And what we are trying to do with SafeCity is really build that situational awareness through historical data, which is the stories that people share. And again, this comes back to my revenue management and network planning, where in business, you look at historical data to understand patterns and trends so that you can make current and future business decisions. That's exactly what we are doing with SafeCity, right? And like a friend pointed out, she says you look at things very visually, which I had never, thought about, because when you look at aircraft airline networks, it's very visual. Even the way you structure the schedule and stuff like that. And so for me, these are things that have been part of my career, part of my work life for a long time, and it's ingrained in me. So, and those are some of the things that I bring to SafeCity and the work that I'm trying to do to address sexual and gender-based violence. Apart from that, as an organization, I think right from the beginning, we've had clear policies, procedures, very structured lines of work so that there's no ambiguity. People know exactly how they have to do their work, what they're supposed to do. They have great autonomy and responsibility. And that in itself drives commitment. So in the beginning, we had not structured ourselves as a formal entity. We had launched the platform, but the organization came 2 years later. And in the meantime, we worked with a lot of volunteers and interns and with absolutely no grants or donations because I refused to take it in my personal name. But because we had structures in place, people could function and you could get work done. And ever since, we've had teams that are fairly independent. We have chapters in 17 countries that are using our platform and they incorporate it as though it's part of their work. And like I was telling you earlier, we work remotely right from day one because I've worked for 2 decades. Of course, not all of it was in an office, but I realized the value of being location independent and saving that time to actually um, use it for whether it's self care or for personal investment or family time or even just putting it back into your work.
Okay, so I have another question. So I wanted to talk about women in leadership roles. So I often find that there is a general tendency in women to emulate men in workplace situation, and many a times that may not be the natural way how women handle work. So how did you navigate this in your professional life? And drawing from your own experiences, what insights do you have for young women who are starting out in their career and have a long way to go?
It's a great question. So when I was starting out in aviation, as a flight attendant and a senior flight attendant, we had a lot of women in leadership because on the aircraft you were the boss, and it didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman because you had a job to do. But as I got into the leadership of the airline, I realized that as you grew higher, there were fewer women in leadership positions, and often you had to work 10 times harder, and yet your opinions or your inputs were not taken gracefully. You had to really fight to get your thoughts accepted. And once, for example, I was even told that it was because people were still seeing me as a flight attendant after I'd worked so hard, after I'd been identified for a fast track, and also put in the effort of upskilling myself with an MBA on the side. So I don't think it's very easy still for women to be in leadership positions, especially if you don't already have women there to emulate. Um, do they role model after men? Sure, because they don't have role models for themselves. So that's why you need more women in leadership so that you can see different styles. Take, for example, when a woman leader fails, all women leaders get branded accordingly. But when a man fails, we don't say that all male leaders are bad, because we have so many examples of different leadership styles. And that's what's missing. And therefore, to correct it, we have a series called She Is. And now we have three books out, one on women in sustainable development, the other on STEAM, and the third is on water, women working in water. And the idea is to showcase different women doing different things in their own unique ways. Also, to make them visible, because, as you know, manners are still a thing, are still a reality. You put on the TV, you will see very few women spokespeople. You'll see panels of men. You'll see conference brochures with all male figures. And nobody blinks an eyelid to say that there's somebody missing at the table. It is important to have women in leadership positions because they have different lived realities, they have different needs. And if you don't have people there to put forward their views, you will end up with a very narrow output or solution. So, yes, I think we need more. And it continues to be a challenge, and it continues to be difficult and toxic, because you saw two major women leaders have given up, or rather stepped down. One was Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, chose to resign. I think one, she recognized that she was burnt out, which is great. I don't see a lot of men saying that. And second was, she decided self care was most important. The other example is Nicola Sturgeon, who was the head of Scotland. And she also said it was really tiring and she was tired of doing the job. So we have to take a step back and wonder why these women at the top are, leaving these positions of power. It's always nice that they recognize their, they've come to the end of their rope and want to make space for others. But why should they do it because it's toxic? Why should they do it because they're tired? Why should it be because they don't feel supported enough? I think that needs to change.
Thanks, Elsa, for that answer. I also find that women around me are mostly, while handling so much work, they find themselves very tired and occupied all the time. And that takes up a lot of their energy and affects their work. So, how do you think, on a systemic level, policymakers and other stakeholders can address this concern?
Everyone has a part to play. So, for example, when I was vice president network planning at Kingfisher and I was recruiting, I would get all male CVs. Now, remember, this was before I was working on the topic of gender. So, when I asked HR, why am I getting all CVs and all CVs of engineers, male CVs, male engineers? They said, well, it's very hard to get women engineers. So I said, but I didn't ask for engineering graduates. So what makes you think that others are not suitable for the job? Now, there is no course for network planning. Maybe now there's something on optimization or whatever. But in those days, there wasn't. So I said, okay, let's create a selection criteria. So we looked at analytical tests, logical thinking tests that would meet the skills needed in the job itself. And we said, okay, irrespective of your education, let's have everyone go through these tests and then shortlist them for the interview. And do you know, I ended up with 1/3 of my team as women, and they came from diverse backgrounds. Even the men came from diverse backgrounds. And I continue to believe that if you have rigid rules and policies, you will exclude people. So keep it broad, because some things are very much teachable. You don't only have to, you know, um, require people from a particular background. Lots of things are about common sense, for any job. Or you can use things like the analytical thinking tests that will throw up different abilities that people have. The most important thing is Are you aware of your biases? Are you aware of who's not in your team? Are you self-aware of your own shortcomings, and are you afraid to address them? Because, for example, I recently did a 360, and I was very surprised with some of the feedback that I got. But recently a board member said that she noticed that I took the feedback and turned it into a positive, and she could definitely see the improvement. How has that translated? That has translated into actually us being cash positive because we were able to increase our revenue. But also, it has given me the space to delegate and do more interesting work for myself, which in turn motivates me. So instead of being afraid of surrounding yourself with intelligent people, I think the first step is to recognize what are your biases, what are your shortcomings, and then fill the gaps with the people around you.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think the starting would be to ensure that the candidate pool is diverse and it is not infused with any bias. So, my next question is you have conducted many workshops, especially for men, to spread awareness about sexual violence. So, what would be your key takeaways from your involvement in such programs? And what do you think how sensitive men are to the challenges that women face in their everyday lives?
I firmly believe that sexual and gender based violence is not a women's issue at all. It's a societal issue. It's the socio cultural context in which we live in that promotes this violence, that perpetuates this violence. And men are also victims of that. So, by educating men, giving them a platform to participate, and creating that confidence that they can challenge the system is critical to our success, to addressing sexual and gender based violence. And right from the start, we were very fortunate to have a lot of male volunteers step up and want to join in. So we've just built on that. And I'm happy to say that, close to 50% of our volunteers are men. Now, why is it important? Let me give you an example. This young man, who was our first head of data analytics, when he looked at our data set, he turned around and he said, "This entire set is wrong." So I said, "Why? Why do you think it's wrong?" And he says, "Well, do you know the peak is between 12 noon and 2 p.m.?" And I said, "Yeah, so what's wrong with that?" And at that time, we were mapping sexual violence in public spaces. And he said, "But don't women get assaulted in the night, in the dark?" And I said, "Well, most of these women are home by 7 p.m., before it gets dark in public spaces." So, you know, and we were not mapping domestic violence or intimate partner violence at that time. And he says, "Oh, I didn't know that, you can be assaulted in broad daylight." And I think these are the kind of insights that people get when you have a conversation, when you break down barriers, and women and men, girls and boys can talk to each other, and all genders can talk to each other about the challenges that they are facing, the problems that they are facing, right? Because we make assumptions all the time, and we live in a reality that's in our head based on our experiences, which is a limited set of experiences. And I think that's why SafeCity data is so important, because it breaks down a lot of those myths and, the biases and the stereotypes that we hold true. And again, if you take lighting seems to be a very it's a favorite solution to solve the problem of sexual violence in public spaces. But if the peak is in broad daylight, is lighting the issue? It's definitely not. So again, understanding the hype, and who's making these plans, who's driving these policies, mostly men at the top, who have no understanding or lived experience of what women go through. That's why it's important that, SafeCity is being used widely and thoroughly by all, whether it is to report or to use the data that has been reported.
That brings me to my final question. So, You are dealing with sensitive and emotionally charged situations. So, how do you keep yourself motivated during these circumstances? Like, what drives you to keep going?
There are many elements to my work. So, one is, of course, the issue itself, which is very heavy to deal with on a daily basis. And I constantly remind myself that, it's not my responsibility to solve the entire issue or this entire problem, which, of course, I can't. But I get my motivation from every single story where a young girl says she has been able to negotiate with her parents for one more year of education, or somebody says that the girls have now started going to school because they were able to break the silence and tell their parents about the sexual harassment that they were facing on the local bus or whatever, and now they have a private bus that ferries them from home to school, and so on and so forth. So, for me, these individual stories are very powerful. And if I feel that even every day I've changed one person's life, I think that's more than enough for me to get going. Apart from that, the other elements of my work are, of course, the technology, which is forever changing. The laws around it are forever changing. So it's stimulating to be on top of it. The networks I'm part of it, the networks I'm part of, because I meet such incredibly inspiring and amazing people who in turn motivate me to do my work better. Um, and of course, there's the urban planning piece, which is complex but also simple, because if you understood what the problem is, you can unlock resources and it doesn't have to be expensive to be part of the solution. So for me, it's like, how much can I push those boundaries on a daily basis? And that is exciting, motivating, satisfying.
I just have a follow up question. So, I wanted to ask, how do you see the role of technology in addressing gender based violence? The evolving role of technology. Is it getting more complicated, or is it making things more easier?
Technology is a tool. We complicate or simplify it. I think, it's not the problem. It is us, whether we design it or use it. So, technology, in my view, has been a great tool for us at Red Dot Foundation. One, of course, is SafeCity. It's a great tool, crowdsourced data. It allows you to map and visualize the violence, but also gives you the information in open source so that more people can be part of the solution, right? The second is social media. We've used it very effectively to communicate, to dialogue, to debate, to grow our community far and wide. And the last one is, I think, you know, um, just awareness. Technology democratizes information in ways that we didn't have earlier. I mean, today, the first thing, if you don't know something about something, what do? You go to Google and you type in a question, right? Similarly, I think you have information at your fingertips, and how you use that content, what content are you looking at, can be controlled to a certain extent by you, or you can put out that content, which is why we invest a lot on education, online safety. The online world is just an extension of your physical world. They are not two separate things, right? So, helping people navigate between the two through these tools is so critical. And I therefore feel that technology is a boon. Of course, how do you use it, and how do you protect yourself? How do you navigate it is based on you. And in creating spaces for dialogue, you can create more awareness on good practices. So, when we talk of technology, SafeCity is also a very easy tool to use. It takes less than 2 minutes to report. So, you can try it out at safecity.in, or even download through the App Store on iOS or Android. You don't have to register your name, email, or give any personal information. Just try reporting what happened to you, the category that fits with it, and the date, time, and location. So, why don't you try it out and let us know what do you think of our app?
Thank you so much, Elsa. It was a wonderful conversation. And thank you for joining us today. I had a wonderful time hosting you. It was very informative, it was very inspiring. And I hope our audience also enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Do subscribe to Carnegie India's YouTube channel for more such content. Thank you so much.